Hi, I'm Jacob Alberts,
I'm Kieran Nixon.
and we are undergrad students at the University of Florida in the Department of Wildlife Ecology and Conservation. And today we're going to be talking about sampling techniques for cryptic and rare bird species.
Any species that has issues with detection probability or ability to be detected is going to inevitably lead to some skewed results in the end. So, in the case of birds, these can be species that are difficult to detect morphologically from one another, or species that just don't show up very often when we're using our traditional techniques, such as mist netting, which is typically the standard for a lot of bird trapping or sampling techniques. And this can lead to all sorts of skewed results in your end result just because you're not detecting the true amount of birds that are in the area. You could get a result that says that they're not there at all or that they're there in the incorrect numbers. So in this project, we hope to present some different methods that may be useful for a variety of different cryptic species.
So our first sampling technique is camera trapping. Camera trapping is great for ground nesting birds, especially galliformes, because these birds are primarily terrestrial species, which means they're easier to catch on trail cams. On the other hand, they're less effective for birds that prefer high canopy or birds that are less likely to take bait. Another benefit to using camera traps is that they allow for systemic trapping, which can be used to provide occupancy estimates. Another downside, though, is that in order to do this, you have to be able to understand the species' natural history.
Another sampling technique is using acoustic arrays, which allows for detection without actually needing to see the bird in question. So this works really well for species that have high vocalization rates, and doubly so if you happen to be sampling in an area that has lower diversity, so the target species that you're looking for is actually more likely to be caught. This does pose problems for birds that have lower frequency of calling or have less reason to call, so a species that might be less territorial might be harder to catch with an acoustic array. But the upside of this is that it does have fewer issues with observer reliability or with repeat sampling because you're not dealing with highly mobile birds necessarily, so you don't necessarily have to see them on camera once or twice. You just mark as you hear different calling or see them later on in the pattern that the acoustic array provides. Another problem is that it can be difficult to parse your target species from different species around it without proper training or intense effort. When done correctly, though, it can be used for occurrence estimates.
A different method is to use survey stations. These provide high detectability by baiting birds through social calls, along with repeatedly using the same survey stations. This is great for highly mobile animals like birds, but also for birds found at high elevations or in extreme climates, where walking transects isn't reliable. Unfortunately, this does rely on birds responding to the calls of another, so less social species may be more difficult to target. And baiting could artificially inflate numbers or alter detection rates. On the other hand, survey stations can be used for abundance and distribution estimates, as well as generally determining whether or not a species is present in the area.
The next method that we'll be discussing is DNA barcoding, which provides a database of information which can help determine genetic differences between cryptic species. This is best for more common birds, so birds that are hard to detect in the sense of morphological similarities as opposed to rarity, or ones that have already been being poached, regardless of status. This does require muscle samples, which are invasive and risky to living birds and have a tendency to degrade quickly in deceased tissue. And this can also be very expensive to attain the required equipment and training needed to conduct it.
Finally, we move on to our recommendations for each method. Camera traps can be a beneficial tool for ground nesting birds, particularly in the order Galliformes. An approximate setup for this is at 45 centimeters above the ground, with cameras attached to the trunks of trees, at a distance of roughly 300 meters between each camera. This was used for a larger Galliforme species, so much smaller species and or species with smaller home ranges should be adjusted accordingly.
For acoustics, audio trapping is most effective for vocal species, though it may fall a little bit flatter for species that are quieter or aren't as noisy for whatever natural history reason. A starting point for placement is 50 meters around each recording device in the array. Sounds that peak above 70 decibels should be picked up within this radius and should be adequate for most bird species.
Survey stations have been used to bait birds by playing social calls, while researchers wait nearby to collect data. This is a play on typical distance sampling and can be useful for the purpose of making territory maps and monitoring abundance, as well as general occupancy surveying. Birds who are difficult to access may benefit from survey stations.
DNA barcoding is best for species that are morphologically similar, as well as species that already have high fatality numbers, often due to poaching. This method is expensive and requires access to a lab and trained individuals, but it's good for the purposes of understanding genetics or confirming the species of a specimen in question. That is all we have currently. Thank you for your time, and let us know if you have any questions.